afternoon, happy Sabbath, and welcome back to another episode of Truth Be Told, a live talk program where youth challenges and issues are discussed. I am Jeanette Joseph.
And I'm Shana Bernard, and we will be your hosts for this afternoon's program. Now we'll be discussing the challenges of dealing with an overprotective parent, as well as how both parent and child can work towards developing a healthy relationship and bond.
To help us with this discussion, we are joined with a beautiful selection of panelists, persons from Antigua, St. Kitts and Nevis, and also Montserrat. But before we begin, I'd like to ask my co-host to pray for us.
Let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you for the Sabbath. Lord, I pray that this discussion will be fruitful and that we'll leave learning something new. Thank you for everything that you've done, and I pray that this program will continue to be successful. In your name I pray, amen.
Amen. At this time, I'd like to ask our panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Risa.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Reese Nelson. I'm 17 years old and I'm from Antigua, and I really enjoy baking on the weekends.
Our next panelist.
Hi guys, my name is Nish. I am 26 and I'm from Montserrat. I hope everyone had a wonderful Saturday and I hope you have a great session today.
Thank you. Katie.
Hi, pleasant good afternoon and happy Sabbath, everyone. My name is Acadian Tyson, Katie for short. I am from Nevis and I'm a member of the Manning Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Okay, that is our selection. This is our panelists for today. So before we begin, I just would have just a little bit to say for us to delve into our questions. Now, according to Proverbs 22, verse 6, it says, "Train up a child in the way in which he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." Now, this is a text I would like us to keep in mind as it will be the foundation for our discussion today. Dealing with overprotective parents is never easy. So today we hope to shine some light on this issue. I hope that as we delve into this topic, we can not only help our youths, but also parents and help our youths to become loving and protective parents themselves. So now we will begin with our questions.
Well, before we begin, we want to remind our audience that you can post your questions in the chat. Also, remember to be respectful while doing so. Now, our first question is a simple question, but it will be based for the discussion. Now, I want to hear Reese's perspective on this question. What is an overprotective parent, and what are some of the signs and examples of an overprotective parent?
Okay, so I think a lot of the times when we think about overprotective parents, we think about involved parents. And I think that there's a difference between an involved parent and an overprotective parent. So an involved parent would make sure that their child is doing homework or they have decent friends, their friends aren't horrible people. But then an overprotective parent takes that and they put it into hyperdrive. So instead of making sure that their child is doing their homework, they're probably doing their homework for them. Or instead of making sure that they have good friends, they choose the friends for them. And I think when your parenting kind of encroaches on how a child can function in the world and they limit how a child can function in the world, I think that's when it goes into overprotective territory.
Right.
I completely agree. Can we get Nish's perspective on this question? What do you think an overprotective parent is?
So an overprotective parent is basically one that wants to protect their child. They have this great desire to protect their child from harm, danger, hurt, pain, unhappiness, etc., etc. So when they see the child about to face certain, obstacles in life, probably their first day of school, they send their child with free lunches so that, if anything happens, they have something, much more than they need to eat. When they go to the beach, they send the child with a lot of flotation devices. The child might feel weird because all their other friends only have one, but they have three, So I think that the overprotective parent might have the best intentions and they think that they're doing what's best for the child, but in actuality, they're doing, harm and danger to the child. One of the biggest signs I think of an overprotective parent is when the child shows, a lot of social awkwardness. They think that the world is a very, very dangerous place. They are not able to function in society as well as, regular children. And that's my perspective.
I completely agree. There's a
Yes.
thin line between overprotection and sheltering, and parents can shelter their child to the point of the child being naive in the real world. And I think this leads us into our next question.
Now, our next question is, how can overprotective parents stunt their child's development? And this is inclusive of mental development as well, with anxiety, which you would have mentioned, and also lack of self-esteem, responsibility, and stress overall. So, to our panelists, what do you think? How can an overprotective person stunt their child's development? And I'd like Katie to start us off with that question.
Okay, so as Nish would have mentioned earlier in his explanation of what an overprotective parent is, he said that the parent will cause the child to be basically unprepared for the world. That would happen because instead of allowing your child to go out and make their own decisions and to fail in some aspects of life, you do things for them and cause them to not learn for themselves. And so that causes somebody to be unprepared for a whole lot of life circumstances. And the other one is that it causes the child to have a lack of confidence, because confidence also comes from your ability to do things. Knowing how to do something gives you confidence in doing something else. And so if you don't know how to do this one particular thing, you wouldn't have any confidence in doing anything else. So that's one way in which parents can stunt their child's development.
That's true, because as children and young people, growing up a child, let's say in a quote unquote bubble, it stunts them from having that experience and also development, learning new things about life, and having that person develop and grow and express themselves as an individual. So I'm really happy you mentioned that. Also, we have been joined by Sasha. Sasha, would you like to introduce yourself shortly? Um, okay. Oh, Sasha, I think you're muted. See if
I think
okay, so
We're
any
going
of
to
our
move
other
to our
panelists?
next question, and then Sasha will introduce herself to our
Right.
audience later.
Our next question, but before we continue, any of our other panelists would like to input on that, as in how an overprotective person can stunt their child's development.
Yes, I'd like to add one point.
Mhm.
I think our overprotective parent, they cause a child to become very fearful of failure, because the parents themselves don't want the child to fail, and they keep telling the child, you need to come straight A's at school, you need to be first in the race when you run, you need to make sure that you pass your driving exams on the first try. So the child hears this all the time, and they become very fearful of failure. And the truth is, failure is a natural part of life. And the truth is also that failure helps us to grow stronger. So it's very important that parents allow their children to have normal mistakes that a normal child would have, and stop preventing them from experiencing these normal aspects of life.
Definitely. Any of our other panelists?
Yeah, I think that overprotective parents, it's a bit of a Pandora's box, because when you start sheltering a child from everything, they don't have the skills needed to operate in the real world, and then you end up with a 50-something-year-old adult living with the parents, not being able to pay bills, not being able to wash dishes, not being able to
That's
function,
true.
really. And that's not fun for anybody. So I think parents need to keep in mind that their child has to, in fact, go out into the world, and that they can't live in this bubble forever that you've created. They have to actually go outside of this bubble.
Yes. Definitely, because in becoming a young adult, there are different experiences that would have added to our maturity and to improve ourselves as individuals. And that kind of led me to our next question, which is what are practical things young people can do to manage their own emotions and frustrations with dealing with overprotective persons? Because growing up in a household, we are aware that our parents are doing the best for us, but sometimes it becomes a little bit difficult, and when emotions are involved, it can cause persons to feel negative emotions. So I would like to, if Sasha is able to, would you like to introduce yourself and tackle this question? Okay, it seems like we can't hear you, sadly.
Yes, we are unable to hear Sasha at this point. I'm not sure what the technical difficulties are, but we can pose the question to another panelist.
Anyone is free to answer.
So
I'll
sorry,
repeat the
can you
question once more. What practical things can young people do to manage their own emotions and frustrations in the house with an overprotective parent or parents?
I would say one of the best ways to combat that issue is to, well, attack the issue is to have a discussion, an open discussion with both parents. I know in instances where you have an overprotective parent, you also have a kind of a closed-minded parent. And so what you can do is bring a mediator, somebody else who's more open-minded and somebody else who the parent is more inclined to listen to as well. So as you bring across your point, then that person, that individual can be the mediator and translate the information, what you're sharing, to the parent in a way that they would be more receptive to.
Yeah, I completely agree. A bridge between the parents and the child would most definitely be helpful, I think.
Any of our other panelists would like to add?
By even talking to your friends, because people swap tips. I don't think you're the only person in the world that has an overprotective parent. So maybe if you have friends who are also have overprotective parents, probably talking to them how they manage with their overprotective parent in a healthy way, of course. Seeing how they dealt with it and probably implementing that in your own life.
Definitely. And I think that an important step to take as well is, as young people, when we think about how overwhelming it may be to have overprotective parents, we must first establish and remind ourselves that our parents are doing this from the goodness of their heart, as in there are good intentions behind their actions, even though sometimes it may be overwhelming. Once you remind yourself of that fact that our parents are doing what's best for us, then you can go about deciding how we can speak to our parents and bridge any miscommunications, and also help to strengthen our bond as well with our parents. Nish, would you like to also add?
Yes. One of the things I think that is important is that we need to be patient with our overprotective parents, because at the end of the day, they are humans, right? And we can't expect change immediately. So I think that when we talk to our parents, we progress slowly, if they allow us to go out with our friends on a Saturday evening, but not necessarily 3 or 4 times a week, then we take that victory. And we just continue talking with our parents, letting them know how we feel, letting them know that we're happy, that we're making some progress, and so on.
Definitely. And communication is key.
Yes, I agree that communication is key.
Yeah.
But how could you go about this conversation? So yes, many of the panelists said speaking and communicating with the parents. How do you start that conversation? So our next question I'm posing to Sasha. How would you approach your parents about loosening some of the house rules, for example? Sasha, I'm not sure what's happening. We're still unable to hear you for some reason. So I'm going to ask Risa, if she could tackle the question. How do you start the conversation?
I think first a bit of introspection is needed. So you would look at yourself and you would say, okay, me as a 17-year-old, is it okay for me to go to Guatemala with my friends alone? You have to really think about the context of the situation because you don't want to overshoot. And then once you've taken that context and you say, okay, I think as a 17-year-old, it's appropriate for me to go to the beach on a Sunday with my friends for a couple hours. That's a reasonable ask. I think once we have a reasonable ask, we started subtly. So you're not going to say, Mommy, can I go to the beach today for today? You're going to probably bring it up the week before, or you slip it into a conversation here or there. So I think Nish said it. You have to you can't just do it all at once. You can't expect it all behavior to change just one time. You have to kind of ease your way into it.
Definitely, there's steps to be taken and also growth as well for not only our parents but for us. I mean, as a person with I wouldn't really say my parents are overprotective, but I say they know their ways around growing me up and ensuring that I grew up in the right way. So usually most times I find myself thinking, okay, I maybe might have to talk to my mom about this like a week in advance or so forth, just
Or
to
a month.
ensure how much, it's sometimes a bit challenging, but we have to learn how to communicate and know, okay, this is what my parents is okay with, this is what they're not okay with, and move forward from there.
Now, what suggestions would you give to a young person who is rebelling because they feel stifled by their parents, or they feel their parents are stifling their freedom?
That's a good question.
How would you suggest they
Like how would the
go
parent-
about it? Yeah.
Any panelist member is free to speak. Katie, would you like to?
Nish is all ready to go.
Oh, Nish, feel free.
Yes. I think one of the things that that is very important is that before you even give any advice to the person who has an overprotective parent, you need to understand the situation. You need to understand what the parents are doing, what the child is doing. For example, the example that Risa gave, maybe the child wants to go to Guatemala and the child is rebelling because they can't go to Guatemala, So the parents have a good reason to not allow the child to go there. But then if the child wants to go out for a beach outing, then, the parent should probably be more lenient. And I think Katie mentioned it earlier. The other thing that you can do too is get someone external to the situation, an unbiased person who can hear all the facts, and maybe the parents trust the person and would listen to the person, so the child could go and talk to that person, ask them to come and speak with their parents or sit in a forum with them and their parents.
Definitely. Friends are very, very helpful, especially with dealing with overprotected parents.
Yeah.
Honestly, from my experience, I'd say that friends are very helpful, especially in dealing with stressful times with their parents. And it's very nice to have a good system of persons around you to support you in any time of distress or dismay.
Yeah.
So that is also very, very, very helpful.
And friends can also advocate on your behalf.
Definitely.
So if your parents know that this friend, for example, is responsible and knows their way around, then they can act on your behalf. We're going to the beach and this days and this time, and we'll be back at this time, and advocate on behalf. I think Katie was going to say something to add to this question.
Not really, but I would say this. It's also important before you go and speak on behalf of the child is to also know the child's strengths and their weaknesses. As Nish and Risa would have alluded to, you have to know the context of the conversation. And so while going to Guatemala requires that individual to have some sort of responsibility in them, the parent might feel as that individual is not responsible enough to go to Guatemala and do all the things that a responsible adult or individual would do and then return home safely. So you have to, I just want to double down on the point that you have to understand the context before you try to speak on behalf of that individual.
Definitely. And I'm so happy that we're all given a lot of examples because it
Yeah.
leads us into our next question, which will be our last before our break. Now, the question is, do you have any personal experience where you would have clashed with your parents over an activity? You thought they were overprotective, so how did you resolve the issue and what lessons did you learn? I'll repeat it one more time. Do you have an experience where you clashed with your parents over an activity? You thought they were overprotective. How did you resolve the issue and what lessons did you learn? Anyone is free to answer. And also, wait, before you guys speak, I just want to give a reminder to persons viewing via Facebook and YouTube. You are free to also ask us questions in the chat and the comments down below. So feel free, we love the questions. And back to our panelists now.
Yes.
Our
So we'll
question.
have one of the panelists tell us one of their experiences where they clashed on an activity with their parents.
How did you resolve the issue? And also, what did you learn from the lesson?
Okay, I think I'll take this one. For a long time, I really wanted social media. I remember in primary school, everybody had a Facebook account, and I couldn't get a Facebook account. And then in secondary school, like lower secondary school, I really wanted Snapchat, and my parents did not allow me to get Snapchat. And I think that stems from the fact that my mom worked in telecommunications, so she knew the permanence of social media that I probably couldn't have understood at the time. When I was around 13, my aunt spoke to my mom. She said, she's 13, she could probably handle Snapchat. And I did eventually get it. So I now know the importance of knowing the permanence of social media. I think because I had that long wait, and I know that the burden that comes with social media. So I don't think she was maybe she was being a touch overprotective, but I could understand why she would have thought the way she thought, and I can understand her rationale.
Definitely, definitely. Any of our other panelists?
I have a good number of examples, but they weren't resolved.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they weren't resolved. So I don't sharing them wouldn't help in this conversation. But I don't believe so.
We could possibly think of a resolution. So you could tell us the situation and we could come to a conclusion.
Definitely. We're here to help.
So for me, my mom never really wanted myself and my sister, to go to the beach without our father. Although when we did go to the beach, it was like with other classmates and other adults, like it was a school setting, but we were never able to go into the water. So what happened is that one of the teachers, they called and tried to speak on our behalf and kind of, pleaded with my mom to allow us to go into the water. It still never happened, but we were able to wet our feet. So I don't know what to take from that, honestly.
No, it is helpful because I mean, I'm sure we would have our own experience with our parents because dealing with our parents, honestly, it's a task, but at the end of the day, we just have to know that it's from a good place and they just want to see the best for us. Like certain times, Chanel and I were friends. I'd like to go out with Chanel, but then it's like sometimes you just can't, sometimes you can.
For that situation though with the beach, I was thinking if there are beaches with lifeguards, if you could consider approaching your parents about going to those beaches. So that could be one of the solutions, or going with someone who is trained. Not maybe not like a lifeguard, but they can swim and they would know how to help in a situation like an emergency, for example. So that's one way you can go about approaching your parents to resolve that situation.
Or also with going out in general, maybe have a chaperone or someone that your parents can trust, or ensure that okay, my child is safe, just in case to relieve any anxiety they may have had or any type of doubts. You can use that to clear that up as well.
Right. So we are moving into our break. We'll take a short break and then we'll return with some more questions as we go through our discussion.
be told. Thank you for joining us back. To our viewers, remember that you are free to give us questions in the comment section on Facebook and via our YouTube platform. So we're going to delve right into it. Okay.
Now, earlier in the discussion, we mentioned that some parents can be overprotective to the point where they stifle their child's growth. Now, let's take, for example, we have a 22-year-old. This 22-year-old, they were overly protected, sheltered, and now they're in the real world and they are naive. What advice would you give to this 22-year-old, for example, on how to adjust and cope with this new reality? So anyone can take this scenario. So I'm going to give Nish the opportunity to give some advice to our hypothetical 22-year-old.
Definitely.
I would say that at the end of the day, we're never too old to learn. And yes, the world might seem scary, the world might seem very dangerous. And in some cases it is. But at the end of the day, we have to start somewhere. So if it is that you're not accustomed to traveling, for example, then the next time you travel, try to, if it's financially feasible, take a friend to show you the ropes. If you are going to the beach, carry someone who can swim. If you're going to like a public speaking event, you practice first in front of your friends. So you try to take little steps to try to get more accustomed to society and the environment in general. Try to make sure that you don't jump fully into it. Don't go too fast because you might be overwhelmed.
Right. I completely
Definitely.
agree.
Of course.
I know our audience may be eager to hear from Sasha Gay. The introduction is never too late, so we're going to have her
Definitely.
introduce herself and then give some advice to our hypothetical 22-year-old.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sasha Gay McDermott, and I'm happy to be here with you all today. Just to respond to the situation that was presented, the scenario that was presented, I think, as Nish indicated, it's important, first of all, to recognize your limitations. So spend some time to get to know yourself, know what your flaws are, know where your weaknesses are, know where your strengths are. And where you find those weaknesses, you seek help. It's okay to ask for help. One of the things, though, in asking for help that you have to be careful about is who you go to ask for help, because you know you have persons who tend to prey on those as well, who they deem as maybe easy targets. So one is to choose your friends wisely. That's very, very important.
Definitely.
Right.
Any of our other panelists?
I just want to piggyback on the point that Sasha made about asking questions and knowing who to ask. There are persons who are even within your own circles who have similar situations as you do. Just as Risa would have mentioned, you're not the only one who would have ever had overprotective parents. And so I know for me, I have a coworker who has very much of a similar background to me. And so sometimes when she speaks of her mom, I feel as though she's speaking about my mom and vice versa. And so what I do is that I just ask questions from what she would have experienced to help in my experience. And so persons with overprotective parents can do the same thing.
Okay, I think our 22-year-old now is well informed and they know how to move forward in their reality.
Let's say, for instance, this 22-year-old, their relationship with their overprotective parent has gotten so broken, so destroyed that they have begun to resent their parents, or even the relationship has gone far beyond compare, as in it cannot be restored. How would you advise this person? How can they reconcile a relationship that was once broken with their parents? And how can they alleviate that type of feeling of resentment and just dismay towards their parents and their environment or household? Anyone is free to answer this question.
Yeah.
So as was mentioned by Nish and Katie, sometimes you need a mediator, a middle person to facilitate a conversation. But if the relationship is already so far gone that you start resenting your parents, I think probably you need to start bringing in a professional, maybe a therapist or a pastor or somebody to act as a middleman, because the connection that you have with your parents is very important. they're the ones that's supposed to be guiding you through life. They are the ones who are mentoring you and nurturing you. And sometimes you just need a professional to mediate the conversation because they know professional, they've gone to school, they've seen this before, they would know how to restore a relationship with you guys. So I think therapy might be a pretty good option.
I wholeheartedly agree. I
Yes,
wholeheartedly
definitely.
agree with seeking professional help
Definitely.
from a mediator, because sometimes even friends and family, they may want to choose a side, right? If they're closer to you, they want to choose your side, and then you have a whole biased discussion carrying on. Or they may be on the parent side, and then you're just sitting there being lectured by the mediator and your parents.
Definitely. And I'd also say to ensure that God is in the midst of any decision or any type of dismay you may have in your family or any type of broken relationship, because after all, God is love. And He is the ultimate and true example of what a relationship should be like, and a protective parent. He is our parent, our number one parent, the parent of all humanity. So from Him, I'd say that we as young people, we have to realize that even though we have broken relationships within our homes or with our parents, we can always rely on God and ask Him for wisdom of how we can deal with these type of situations and better ourselves as individuals. And there's also a passage from Ellen G. White. I'd just like to insert here. It says, "Parents, you carry responsibility that no one can bear for you. As long as you live, you are accountable to God to keep His way. Parents, you make the word of God their guidance, and who realize how much their children depend upon them for the characters they form, will set an example that will be safe for their children to follow." And this is from Ellen G. White from the Adventist home. So even from Ellen G. White's teaching, we can see that God is also in the midst, and He also wants to guide not only our youths, but also our parents in raising us up as well. Any of our other panelists would like to input?
I think, as Risa would have mentioned before as well, introspection is a key component to this situation as well, because even when you bring in a professional, you have to also understand that you would have played a role in this situation as well. Why is it that the relationship has been broken? Like, why did it go to that extent? Why didn't you speak to your parents prior to it being that far gone, the relationship being that far gone? And so you have to also understand that your parents is doing this out of love. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. Like, I know some parents, you have some parents who are nonchalant in their parenting, and so they allow a lot of things to happen to their children. And there are some persons who are more guided, while there are other persons who are overprotective. But overprotective parents are overprotective because they love you. I mean, being overprotective does stunt you, but they're doing it because of their love for you. So you also have to be open-minded to that understanding that your parents are doing it out of love.
Yes. Now, we've been speaking about parents who will give a little leniency and parents who are overprotective, right? And we did say that they need to strike a balance. How would you say a parent could go about striking this balance between being lenient and overprotective? Where does it where do we differentiate between the two?
Definitely.
Or how can we differentiate between the two?
As you guys have said earlier, I think it's important to note that being a protective parent isn't a bad thing, because the protection that you give your child helps your child, protects your child from danger, protects your child from things that might harm them. Where it gets to be a problem is when you start to hamper the child's growth because of your protectiveness. One of the things that I think every parent should keep in mind is the age of the child. For example, telling your child that they can't go to, let me use the same example of Guatemala, when they're 14, 13 is understandable. But telling that to your child when they're 22, 24, the child is an adult. The child has become an adult. So the child should be able to make that decision for themselves. And it's important to have like an idea of time when it comes to punishment. For example, especially with age. For example, taking away a phone from a 13-year-old for 2 days, 3 days, would make the child feel horrible about it. But taking away a phone from a 18-year-old for 3 days might not have the same effect. Maybe they might leave, walk out the house, whatever, because they're so attached to their phone. So you have to have an understanding of your child. You have to have an understanding of what works in terms of discipline. You have to have an understanding of how the child will react when you tell them certain things.
And I'm actually happy you brought up the word discipline, because the saying spare the rod and spoil the child also comes into mind. And when it comes to overprotective parents, most persons will link it to this saying as well. So I'd just like to ask the panelists, where does this come into play as a Christian or Adventist parent when it comes to discipline and ensuring that your child grows in the right way, and also being overprotective? How do you balance this? How do you implement this way of raising your child correctly, but not in a way that it's suffocating to your child?
And I would just like to add before the panelists answers. There is this discussion or debate going on social media about beating children, for example. And the discussion is we shouldn't beat children, so sparing the rod, because it's a form of abuse, right? So also in your answer, I want to hear your perspective on disciplining children using physical methods.
Okay, so in terms of discipline, the form of discipline that you use should match the that your child did. So if the child did something simple, you're not going to bring down all heaven and rain on that person just because they did a simple act that you didn't agree with. Right, and correction is important because it helps you. It helps in your growth. You can't go through life doing things wrong all the time and not expect to be corrected. I mean, even in the workplace, you receive correction, and in any stage of your life, you would receive correction. How that person goes about correcting you does play a part, because if you have a parent who overdoes it in the discipline area, then you might grow to resent your parent. But disciplining your child is very important. I had a question before you moved on to this question. I don't know if I should insert it now, but Nish mentioned age as an important factor. How about gender? Like, what do you feel when it comes to, what are your thoughts on gender and the overprotective parents? Because there are some parents who allow their son, their male children, to do whatever it is that they want while their girl child are inside. So what are your views on that as well?
Okay.
I think it's genuinely about equality, because how would I feel if my little brother could do any and anything and me as a girl, I can't? So I think that parents have to keep that in mind, because you have to treat all your children the same. I guess not all the same, because as I said, as was mentioned before, the people have different maturity levels as well, and different levels of responsibility. But I think once the level of responsibility that person has, the maturity that they have, the age that they have, should be taken into consideration. But I don't think necessarily gender, because that can have a ripple effect on to the relationship between the children. You have sibling rivalry happening, and then you have one big mess on your hands, and that's never a good thing. So I think
Definitely.
I completely agree with that.
Completely.
Because the double standard that will arise by doing so will cause even more problems between the parent-child relationship. Now, Sasha Gay, we have a question here from YouTube, and it says, should the church intervene in the relationship between parents and their children? Should the church intervene between the relationship of parents and children?
I think there is a place for that. The church is there to also act as a support system for families, especially families who are in need of help when it comes to child rearing and so on. But there has to be a balance. It can't be every single thing that is happening in the home that the church is always involved in it. So there has to be a balance. And I think as well that it should be more of a role of providing guidance and support for the families, but the church should never sit idly by either and see a situation where a child is being abused or in a situation where they're being neglected or any other form of abuse and stand by or take the back seat. That's not what God requires of us. So it's important that there be a balance, but the church should be there to support families.
Yes, because they say it takes a village to raise a child, and the church is a part of that village as well. And once again, balance is extremely important.
And sometimes it can be very tough for parents as well. And that's why we're talking about this discussion, because we're not also trying to reach our youth, but also the parents, because we do know that it is hard. We do know it is difficult to raise children, especially more than one. So we want to keep that in mind. We have another question, and it says, can a child who grew up with an overprotective parent become an overprotective parent themselves? Oh, I like this question. Can a child who grew up with an overprotective parent become an overprotective parents themselves? If so, how can we be mindful? Like, how can we stop this from occurring, as in this ripple effect of an overprotective parent eventually raising someone who's overprotective as well? So what are your thoughts? And this goes out to anyone.
If I should interject here as well, it's important that we recognize our weaknesses, and I think it is so easy for this cycle to continue, and it takes understanding that you have flaws as a parent, and your parent was the best parent they knew how to be. So when you're thinking about becoming a parent, or if you are a parent, sometimes you have to take a step back and acknowledge when you're wrong as well. And where you do recognize that you have shortcomings, that's where you go to the word. Yes, that's where you go and you seek help as well. Sometimes it may take that you need a third person, to intervene, to help you to process your own experiences that have shaped you into the person you are, so that you break the cycle, or at least you start to break the cycle, so that you don't make the same experiences that you had as a child become those of your children.
Definitely.
And I think Ellen G. White covered this, and I'm going to read a little quote from her, and she says, "Parents, you carry the responsibility that no one can bear. As long as you live, you are accountable to God to keep His way. Parents who make the word of God their guide and who realize how much their children depend upon them for the characters will set an example that it will be safe for their children to follow." And I think that encompasses exactly what Sasha Gay just said.
Definitely.
Now we will have our panelists tell us their final thoughts. This discussion was fruitful, and I think that we've learned something, and also that the audience have got some tips as well. So we'll have our final thoughts from our panelists, and we'll begin with Risa. What are some of your final thoughts on this discussion?
Oh, I think with all that we've discussed today, I think we really covered that your parents aren't being overprotective to hurt you. They're probably being overprotective to love you. And I think that once we understand that, we can have a very good conversation with our parents about the tendencies that they may have. And I think once we do so respectfully, once we do so with an open mind, that we can have a really fruitful conversation, and that we can probably rectify any issues that we've been having.
We also have another question here from YouTube. What do you think are the best forms of discipline when it comes to children depending on age? What do you think are the best forms of discipline when it comes to children depending on their age?
I think Nish can take this as he gives his final thoughts as well, since he did bring up discipline and age.
Personally, when the question was asked earlier about physical discipline, personally, I'm not really a fan of physical discipline, because it's easy to blur the line between a normal lash on the hand or whatever, and actual beating where it gets borderline abusive. Some might say that when a child is young, you should beat them, and maybe you can, but you have to be very careful. You have to understand yourself and your weaknesses. Maybe you might have a problem with anger management. So if you do, maybe you should seek some form of alternative punishment. But depending on the child's age, I think you need to, research is always good. So you can, Google, talk to your fellow peers, your other parents, and find out, even your own parents, find out what worked for you, find out what you responded to at whatever age, find out what your peers, children respond to at their age, see what's appropriate. I think also it's important to have a good understanding of the environment when you discipline your child. Because, for example, your child might be in school, and that might not necessarily be the best time to punish the child, because that can have lasting embarrassing effects on the child. So just have a good understanding of the environment, the child itself, you, yourself, and how your actions affect your child.
Right. Katie, as you give your final thoughts, I also have another question as well from YouTube. It says, does a child's level of maturity, especially a child over 17, have an influence on the parents being overprotective? And what advice do you have for the child or parent in that case? Once again, does a child's level of maturity, especially one over 17, have an influence on a parent being overprotective? And what advice do you have for the child or parent in that case?
I'm here smiling because I was so ready to answer the question before that one. I didn't see this one pop up in the chat. But I will say this. It should have an influence on the parents being overprotective. As a matter of fact, I feel like as your child grows older, you should be more lenient as a person, as a parent, because at that point in time, you have a young adult already.
Yeah.
Whatever you have instilled in that child, now is the moment. 17, that is the moment for the child to implement whatever it is that you would have taught them, and you should just allow them to make mistakes. I was a teacher and I taught high school. I taught from 3rd form to 5th form. My 3rd formers would say I was a strict teacher. My 5th formers, on the other hand, would not say I was a strict teacher. And that's because I didn't feel as though I needed to be strict for 17-year-olds. 17-year-olds should have the understanding and should have already know exactly what it is to be expected from them, from the teachers. And so I just feel as though as you grow older, you should as the child goes older, you should allow the child to make more mistakes. I mean, 17 is just on the cusp of leaving the home and going out into the world and into the workplace. And so that's an opportunity for them to figure it out for themselves. My last word is towards the parents. Just let you allow your child to make mistakes. I mean, mistakes and failures help us to grow as individuals. And so I feel as though that is a very important point to take away from this discussion this afternoon.
Okay. Now, Risa, as you give us your final thoughts, we have a question for you. If a child sees no way out from the overprotective parents, what should they do? If a child sees no way out from an overprotective parent, what should they do?
That's a very interesting question because it suggests that there's no room for improvement. I believe there's always room for improvement. You may not be where you want to be at the end, but the little wiggle room can mean the world of difference. And if they don't see any way out, the parent is steadfast in the ways. I think understanding that there is an end, you will eventually move out, you will eventually have to manage the world, and preparing yourself, because if they are sheltering you, you probably have to do that yourself. You would have to go on YouTube and find certain ways of doing things. And I think preparing yourself, knowing that it will end eventually, I think that can be that can console some people.
Definitely. Thank you for that input. Another question. Why are children afraid of their parents, and what must be done to ensure their child does not do the same to their offspring?
So I think that question is kind of subjective because what the child is afraid of depends on the parent-child relationship. If
Definitely.
it is abuse, verbal or physical, the child may be afraid to make a mistake and then, as a result, become abused. So it really depends on why they are afraid of their parents, and then we can get into what must be done to ensure that the child. And I think it depends on the
Yeah,
child really,
it really does
because
depend.
you have to have a certain character to be influenced in such a way to do that, because you know, right, that your parent was overprotective or they were abusive, for example, and you know how you felt, right? You were afraid that every time you made a mistake that they would lash out on you, they would beat you. So then to carry on that tradition, it's I think that would have to be dealt with professionally, actually.
Definitely, definitely. Because some children are not exactly afraid of their parents, but more so the consequences or what their parents are capable of or what their parents may say. That's why we really linked it to a lot of anxiety and different trauma that can arise. So professional help is definitely recommended because if it is something that is not dealt with, it can spiral in out of control. So that is very much a good advice to give.
Okay.
So, our panelists, once again, anybody would like to input anything, final closing thoughts?
I want to say this. What I realized is I just completed my university degree, and what I noticed a lot from being on campus is that persons who would have had overprotective parents, they left their home with views of the world that their parents had. And so they were not able to develop their own perspectives and ideas on certain topics. And when they enter university, they are somewhat lost and naive, and so they begin to try all kind of things, and they don't have any moral compass of their own. And so I would just like to encourage parents to allow their child not to impact their own morals and values. Should not say that. Allow the child to develop whatever it is that they find important and worth holding as their belief. That's
Definitely.
um, contradictory, but that's my thought.
Okay.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you so much. And today's discussion has honestly been very, very helpful, not only to us, but also our viewers watching and everybody who would have tuned in. And I really hope that it would have helped parents as well. We are all, I'm sure, leaving with something to say, right? Everybody is leaving with something very, very beneficial. So at this time, I just want to thank you, our panelists. Thank you so much for joining us. Honestly, a very, very fruitful discussion. And I also want to thank everyone who is behind this initiative, making Truth Be Told possible. We appreciate you and we are genuinely happy for the experience. I'm sure everybody can agree with that. Any of our panelists, any special shout outs that you'd like to give at this time?
Sasha Gay, do you have any final words for our audience?
Definitely.
Yes, just remember that, as I think it was said earlier, that parents are doing the best that they can. It means that sometimes it is not necessarily the best, but be patient. Choose when you're having that honest conversation with your parent. Make sure it's not at a time where they're tired or frustrated. Make sure that it's a time when they are most at ease or at peace, and think about what you want to say before you do it. Kind of plan what you want to say to have the honest discussion about their overprotective tendencies. That's important. And also be patient. Try to understand where they're coming from. Though misguided as it may be at times, it's from a good place, which was said earlier. So be patient with your parents and forgive. When they
Right.
make mistakes,
Okay. So now we just want to remind our audience that if you have any questions or you have a topic you'd like us to discuss or you'd like to be a panelist on this show, to send us an email at slcyouthmedia@gmail.com. We're here to unpack the truths as rooted in God's Word on issues impacting youth. Thank you again for joining us.
So until our next episode, I am Jeanette Joseph.
And I am Chanel Bernard.
Stay safe and
God
God bless.